Imagine this, a story writer who suddenly turns into a cold-blooded killer. But the real twist? After committing his crime, he decides to write a novel that exposes every detail, details only he could possibly know. Every page is a shock, every word, a direct challenge to the police. Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. This is a journey into the mind of a man who chose to immortalize his own crime on paper. A journey that starts in the world of fiction, but ends in the darkest, most horrifying reality you can imagine. Now, let's dive in and enjoy the thrilling details that make this story. It was a cold December day, back in the year 2000. Somewhere in a quiet region in eastern Poland, 3 fishermen headed down to the riverbank, just like they always did, hoping to catch some fish. But that day wasn't normal at all. As they watched the water, something drifting slowly across the surface caught their attention. At first, they thought it was just a tree trunk carried by the current. But as they walked closer, everything changed. The first thing they noticed was hair. Long strands of hair floating on the surface. Hair that could only belong to a human. And in that moment, the fishermen realized this wasn't a log, and it definitely wasn't debris. It was a human body. They acted fast, the 3 of them working together, and managed to pull the body to shore. The moment they laid it on the ground, the reality hit. The man wasn't moving, and he was clearly gone. They called the police immediately. When investigators arrived and took a single look at the body, they knew right away. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't some random drowning. A rope was tied tightly around the man's wrists behind his back and wrapped around his neck in a cruel, deliberate way. Any attempt to move his hands would have tightened the rope around his throat, choking him slowly. Just seeing that setup was enough to confirm it. This was a calculated murder. But there was an even bigger problem. The body had been in the river for a long time, and the water had washed away any fingerprints, DNA, or trace evidence that could have led them to the killer. And honestly, that seemed to be exactly why the murderer dumped him there, to erase every clue. When specialists began examining the body, the findings were even darker than anyone expected. His body was covered in deep bruises and cuts. His stomach and intestines were completely empty, meaning he hadn't eaten for days before he died. And worse, his lungs were full of water. He had been thrown into the river while he was still alive. With his hands tied behind him like that, every struggle tightened the rope around his neck, pushing him closer and closer to suffocation, until eventually he drowned. For the investigators, these details confirmed one thing. This wasn't a random killing. This was personal, fueled by real hatred. The killer didn't just want him dead, he wanted him to suffer. After comparing the body's description with missing persons reports, they finally identified him. His name was Dariusz Chanchevsky, a manager at an advertising company in his 30s and missing for about a month. The police launched a full investigation. They reached out to his family, his friends, everyone who knew him. But every testimony said the same thing. Dariusz lived a quiet life. No problems, no enemies, no ties to anything criminal. A calm, decent man, with nothing in his life that hinted at a murder like this. And every path the investigators followed led nowhere. 6 months of searching. Nothing. Eventually, the case was filed away as unsolved. A cold case. No progress, no new clues. But in Poland, there's an important routine procedure. Cold cases must be reviewed from time to time, not fully reopened, just handed to a new investigator who flips through the file again, searching between the lines, hoping something small was overlooked, something that could change everything. In 2003, 2 full years after the murder, the case file landed on the desk of a detective named Jacek Woroniecki. Jacek wasn't a stranger to this case at all. It had been the talk of Poland, and he'd followed it closely from day one. So when the file officially became his, he felt something spark inside him. A real drive, a need to shake the dust off this investigation and look for any thread that could bring the truth back to life. He started flipping through the pages one by one, revisiting every interview, every report, every overlooked detail. And as he combed through the old evidence, something caught his eye. A detail buried inside an earlier testimony, something the original investigators didn't pay enough attention to. It came from the victim's mother, Dariusz's mother. She worked as an accountant at the advertising company her son owned. During her interview 2 years earlier, she mentioned something strange that happened on November 13th, 2000. The last day anyone saw Dariusz alive. That morning, around 9:30, the company received a phone call from an unknown man asking for Dariusz. He said he needed a rush job done, printing 3 giant advertising billboards. But every time she asked for details, the company name, the type of project, anything, he refused to answer. He kept insisting he'd only speak to Dariusz directly. Weird. But she didn't think much of it. She simply gave him Dariusz's mobile number and hung up. The caller ended the conversation immediately, without giving his name. A few hours later, Dariusz returned to the office. His mother told him about the call, and he replied that he'd already spoken to the man, and they'd set a meeting for later that afternoon. That was the last conversation she ever had with her son before he disappeared. When investigators reviewed the phone records back then, they discovered something alarming. Every call, the one made to the office and the one to Dariusz's cell phone, came from the same public phone booth. A booth located on the exact same street as the company. Meaning the mysterious caller wasn't far away. He was close. Close enough to watch the building. Close enough to watch Dariusz. At the time, this caller became the prime suspect. But a public phone? Anyone could use it. No fingerprints. No camera footage. Nothing that could reveal who the man really was. The lead went cold, and the detail was pushed aside. But this is where Jacek stepped in. While re-examining that testimony, he noticed something crucial, something everyone else missed. If Dariusz left the office to meet that mysterious man, then he must have taken his cell phone with him. And yet, the phone was never found. Not in the river, not near the crime scene, not in his car, not in his office. It had vanished completely. The earlier investigators assumed it fell into the river, or that the killer got rid of it. But Jacek thought differently. What if the killer kept the phone? And what if, even after all these years, the phone could still lead them to him? That single idea was enough to ignite a brand new spark in a case everyone else had already given up on. Jacek dove into this new lead with everything he had, and luckily, he found out that Dariusz's wife had kept the receipt for his cell phone, the official warranty paper. That receipt turned out to be pure gold. It had the phone's IMEI number, the one code that identifies a device no matter who uses it or what SIM card is inside. With an IMEI, a phone can be tracked through telecom providers, even years later. As soon as Jacek got the number, he sent a formal request to the phone companies. He wasn't expecting much. But the answer that came back hit him like a punch. The phone was still in use. Yes, even after 2 whole years, someone was still using that same device. Jacek began tracing the phone's history, step by step. And slowly, a chain of 4 different people appeared. 4 users who'd had the phone over the past 2 years. He tracked each of them, one by one, moving backwards through the chain, until he reached the very beginning. The first person who used the phone right after the murder. When Jacek questioned that man, he said he bought the phone through an online marketplace for used items. But when Jacek checked the purchase date, his eyes widened. The man had bought the phone just 3 days after the murder. Which meant one thing. The person who posted the phone for sale was almost certainly the killer. Jacek dug into the website and found the old listing. The phone had been listed for less than $100, and the seller used a nickname, Chris_B7. He opened the seller's profile, and right there, in the account details, was the real name, Krystian Bala. Once the police matched the information, a full profile appeared. A man in his 30s, living what looked like a normal life on the outside, but he wrote fiction, crime stories, novels. That's when Jacek's curiosity ignited. He decided to dig deeper and get his hands on Bala's latest book, a novel called Amok. It was categorized as a crime novel, but the moment he started reading, something felt wrong. Very wrong. The style didn't feel like fiction. The details were way too close to reality. So close it felt like he was reading a confession disguised as literature. The sadism, the exaggerated violence, the twisted desire for dominance and cruelty. Everything about the writing screamed that the author wasn't inventing a fantasy. He was describing something he'd lived. And the shocks didn't stop there. The main character's name in the book was Chris. As if Krystian Bala wrote about himself, without even trying to hide it. He portrayed Chris as someone extraordinary, above the law, above people, above nature itself, untouchable, unaffected, a narcissist to a terrifying degree. But then came the knockout blow. Chapter 9. That chapter described the murder of a young woman named Mary, Chris's girlfriend in the story, whom he killed because she cheated on him. And the way Krystian described the killing was brutally realistic. He tied her hands behind her back, wrapped the rope from her wrists up to her neck. The exact same knot, the exact same setup, the same horrific details found on Dariush's body. Details that were never released to the public. Then he wrote that Chris tortured her, stabbing her again and again until she died in his arms. After that, he sold the murder weapon, the knife, on an online marketplace. Jacek felt his blood run cold as he read. This wasn't a coincidence. The similarities between the book and Dariush's murder weren't random. They were almost identical. By this point, Jacek was 99% convinced the killer was Krystian Bala. But even with all this, the police hit a serious roadblock. When they tried to summon Krystian Bala for questioning, they discovered he had already left Poland back in 2001, right after the murder. As if he knew that one day, someone would finally uncover the truth. Jacek started feeling like every step he took was leading him straight into another dead end. Sure, they had a name now, Krystian Bala, but the motive? Nothing. Not a single thread. And even though all the evidence was pointing toward Krystian, the case still needed something crucial, a reason, a real connection between the killer and the victim. But according to every interview, every witness, every background check, there was no link between Dariush and Krystian. No friendship, No past, no business, no overlap in their lives. Nothing. And the worst part? The brutality of the murder, the torture, the slow strangulation, all of it screamed that the killer held a deep personal hatred for the victim. So how does someone hate a man he's never even met? That question crushed Jacek. He knew that questioning Krystian's family or friends could ruin everything. If Krystian sensed, even for a second, that the police were getting close, he'd never set foot in Poland again. So Jacek kept the family out of it and returned to the only key he still had. The novel, Amok. He sat down with it again, read it, then reread it, then went over certain pages 10 times in a row. He was searching for anything, a hint, a phrase, a line, that could answer the question, why did Krystian Bala kill Dariusz? And the strange part, the motive was right there in the book, clear as day. But only clear to someone who actually knew the real details of Krystian's life. Jacek didn't, so he couldn't see it, even though it was staring him in the face. And honestly, I mentioned the reason earlier myself, but most of you probably missed it, just like Jacek did. The true motive wouldn't be revealed until much later, after Krystian was finally arrested, after he was forced to sit in an interrogation room and tell the whole story exactly as it happened. And since the police had nothing else to go on, all they could do was wait. Wait for this arrogant, confident man, the man who wrote proudly about his own crime, to walk back into Poland on his own. Weeks passed, then months, then years, until one day, in 2005, at one of Poland's airports, border control agents were running routine checks on arriving passengers. Then suddenly, the security system flashed a red alert. This person must be stopped immediately. The name on the passport? Krystian Bala. He was detained on the spot. Police arrived, took him into custody, and officially arrested him. 5 whole years after the murder. Inside the interrogation room, Krystian sat across from them, calm, cold, almost emotionless, as if he were the one interrogating them, not the other way around. He answered with confidence, quietly, smartly, without slipping up once. He denied everything, gave them nothing. Hours passed. The investigators were losing patience and losing hope. Then, a small moment changed everything. One detective threw out a casual question, a simple attempt to provoke him. So, did you do it alone, or did someone help you? They expected the usual answer. No, I didn't commit any crime. But what happened next was completely different. That question hit something deep inside Krystian. Maybe his pride, maybe his ego, maybe that narcissism that refuses to share credit with anyone. He went silent for a few seconds, looked them right in the eyes, and said one sentence that shook the entire interrogation room. No, no one helped me. I carried out the whole thing, from start to finish, by myself. The investigators froze. They couldn't believe it. A simple question, a tiny provocation, just exposed the whole truth. Krystian Bala, the killer, confessed, not out of fear, not out of guilt, not because of pressure. He confessed because his ego couldn't stand the idea that someone else might get credit for his work. The man was actually proud of what he'd done, like an artist defending his masterpiece, forgetting completely that this wasn't a book signing, and these weren't fans. This was an interrogation room, and he had just incriminated himself with his own arrogance. The investigators were, of course, thrilled. They had just gotten a confession, so easily it felt unreal. But that excitement didn't last long. Suddenly, Krystian started acting weird. He glanced around the room, left, right, his eyes wide with real panic. Then he started tugging at his clothes, almost ripping them open, like he couldn't breathe, like something was crushing his chest. He was gasping, panting, like he'd just been thrown into the middle of a panic attack. And right there, in the middle of that bizarre moment, he started yelling at the detectives, demanding a doctor, immediately. They stopped the interrogation, called an ambulance, and within minutes, the medical team arrived. They laid him on a stretcher, checked him from head to toe, and after a few minutes, the doctor walked out and told the detectives, "Nothing's wrong. His vitals are normal. He's completely fine." So they brought Krystian back into the interrogation room, and just like that, he was calm again, as if none of it had happened. They handed him the papers containing his statement and asked him to sign. But suddenly Krystian changed his story completely. He pulled back his confession, said the written statement was wrong, and then, just like before, he denied committing the murder altogether. That was the moment the investigators realized, especially Jacek, that this man was playing with them. To him, this wasn't a real interrogation. It was a new chapter in a story he was writing. He saw himself as the main character, untouchable, above the law, above everyone else. They were dealing with a full-blown narcissist, a man who believed he was the smartest person in any room, a man who needed control, needed dominance, needed to feel superior. Jacek understood then. They weren't going to get a genuine confession. They had only one option left: build an airtight case and destroy him in court. So Jacek started again from scratch. He interviewed everyone connected to Krystian Bala, family, friends, anyone who knew him. Before Krystian's arrest, Jacek avoided them, afraid someone might warn him and keep him out of Poland forever. But now, Krystian was locked in. Every door was finally open. And through those interviews, Jacek finally started to understand Krystian's real personality and his dark past. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. Yes, he was smart. Yes, he had a strong presence. But he was also unbelievably arrogant, pathologically narcissistic, and a compulsive liar. He made up stories about himself, exaggerated everything, painted himself as some kind of genius or legendary figure, and on top of that, he was infamous for his relationships with women. His confidence and looks made it easy for him to attract them. From high school to university, it was like a game to him. Then, in 1995, at just 23 years old, he met a girl named Stasia, and with the same charm he used on everyone, he swept her off her feet. They got married not long after. But once they were married, she saw the real him, what was hiding under that charming mask. They had a child together. But the marriage? It was falling apart fast. Krystian yelled at her all the time. He abused her, physically and emotionally. If he couldn't win with words, he won with force. And here's where the darker side of his personality really starts to show. He cheated on his wife constantly and bragged about it, didn't even try to hide it. And whenever Stasia confronted him, he responded with cold arrogance. "I'll do whatever I want. Your job is to stay home and raise the kid." That was the size of his madness. That was his ego. Meanwhile, he was bouncing between school and business, failing at everything he tried. Which makes you ask, was Krystian actually smart? Or was he just a man whose sick ego made him believe he was a genius? Most likely, the second one. As the failures piled up, Stasia reached her breaking point. She went to court, got a divorce, and walked away from his toxic life. But for Krystian, the divorce wasn't just a breakup. It was an attack on his pride, a wound straight to his ego, and then he became obsessed with her, even more than when she was his wife. Like a child whose toy has been taken away, he wanted it back even more. His narcissism whispered to him, "How dare this worthless woman leave me? I'm the one who leaves. I'm the one who decides." To him, she wasn't a human being. She was property, a possession. And once she was gone, he became consumed. He followed her everywhere, tracked her, showed up unexpectedly. Sometimes he blocked her path and threatened to kill her, and threatened to kill any man who even came near her. And this is where his darker nature starts unfolding completely. This is where the door opens to something even more dangerous. Year 2000, the moment everything collapsed. When Stasia met a new man, someone who slowly started becoming part of her life, that man wasn't just anyone. That man was Dariusz Januszewski. And the second Detective Jacek uncovered this piece of information, the whole picture finally snapped into place, like the last missing puzzle piece that had been hiding for years. Suddenly, it all made sense. When Krystian found out about the relationship between his ex-wife and Dariusz, that old rage inside him reignited. The jealousy, the wounded ego, the obsession, and his threats turned into a decision, and that decision turned into murder. Jealousy, the same motive he wrote about in his novel. Only difference? In the book, Chris kills his unfaithful lover, but in real life, Krystian killed his ex-wife's new partner. And now the brutality made sense. The torture, the starvation for days, the slow suffocation, the body thrown into the river while he was still alive and bound. This wasn't random violence. This was revenge. Revenge from a narcissist who believed the whole world revolved around him, and that anyone who dared touch what he thought was his property had to be punished. After Krystian Bala's arrest and the unraveling of his story, the media exploded. The case spread from Poland to all of Europe, and even into American news. The headline was irresistible. A killer writes the details of his crime in a novel, and the book becomes a bestseller. His novel Amok started selling like crazy. It shot straight into bestseller lists, became a literary sensation, not because it was brilliant, but because its author was a murderer. But then came the real shock, inside the courtroom. Despite the novel's fame, and despite the eerie similarities between its plot and the real murder, the court ruled that the book could not be used as evidence. The prosecutor was clear. The novel was fiction, not a confession, and it couldn't be treated as one. And the biggest twist, Krystian wanted them to use the novel against him. He was waiting for that moment. The moment he'd become the misunderstood genius author, the victim of a stupid system that puts imagination on trial. He wanted the drama. He wanted the attention. He wanted the spotlight. But the court didn't give him the show he wanted. The judge looked him straight in the eye and said coldly, "We are judging you for your crime, not your book." And right there, something snapped inside Krystian. For the first time, the confident mask disappeared. The calm tone vanished. The arrogant stare broke. For the first time since the investigation began, Krystian Bala realized he was losing control. The charges were closing in on him. The walls were tightening, and there was no escape left. The evidence against Krystian Bala just kept piling up, one piece after another. and each one slammed the door harder on any chance he had to deny what he'd done. The first piece of evidence was Dariush's phone. The online account that listed his phone for sale? Yeah, it was registered to Krystian himself. One of the dumbest things he ever did. Instead of destroying the phone or burying it somewhere, he posted it online. That phone became the very first link tying him straight to the murder. The second piece of evidence was the public phone card he used to make those mysterious calls. Remember that strange call to the office? The same unknown caller used the exact same card to call Dariush's mobile. The police never found the physical card, but they traced every call made from it. And what did they discover? The card wasn't just used to contact Dariush and his mother. It was also used to call Krystian's own friends and family. Meaning, whoever used the card was Krystian Bala. It became the second major piece of evidence tightening the noose around him. The third piece came from his ex-wife, Stasia. She described the violence, the abuse, the threats, the obsessive behavior that escalated even after the divorce. And the court confirmed that Stasia's relationship with Dariush started before he disappeared, and that Krystian had threatened to kill any man who got close to her. Krystian kept denying everything, insisting he never knew Dariush, but Stasia's testimony crushed him. Then came the fourth piece, a shock from his own belongings. 5 years after the crime, police searched his parents' home. No one expected them to find anything useful, but they did. A notebook with handwritten notes about Dariush's advertising company, a pen with the company's logo, and a business card belonging to Dariush himself. Krystian swore he had never met the man. But these items blew his lies apart, and psychologists had a term for this behavior: crime trophies. Killers keep souvenirs to relive the achievement. A twisted, narcissistic ritual. This became the fourth piece of evidence, and it hit hard. The fifth piece came from the internet. There was a famous crime TV show in Poland that covered the case, and their website kept receiving comments from all over the world. Asia, America, places where the show wasn't even known. When detectives traced the IP addresses, they matched perfectly with the countries Krystian had traveled to over the previous 5 years. The man was literally commenting about his own crime online, bragging about it to the world. Then came the sixth piece, a testimony from one of Krystian's friends. On New Year's Eve 2000, the night of the murder, Krystian had been drinking heavily with friends, and during the drunken rambling, he confessed that he had killed his ex-wife's lover. The friend thought it was meaningless drunk talk, but when the case exploded, he realized it wasn't a joke at all. With all this evidence, the court didn't need anything else. Sure, most of it was circumstantial, but when circumstantial evidence stacks this high, it becomes overwhelming. The verdict? Krystian Bala was convicted of murder, but the sentence shocked many people. Only 25 years in prison. Imagine that. A man who tortured his victim, starved him, bound him, and threw him alive into a river, gets just 25 years. But European law rarely gives life sentences unless it's a serial killer. And the wildest part? When he walks out in 2032, he might find a small fortune waiting for him. Royalties from his novel Amok, which became famous because of the murder. And to this day, he denies everything, claiming the police and court used his fictional book to frame him. A narcissist to the very end. A man who truly believes he's above the law, above everyone, untouchable. And with that, we reach the end of this disturbing story. A story of obsession, jealousy, narcissism, and a mind twisted beyond reason. A story that reminds us once again that truth is often stranger than fiction. If this story hooked you, then you'll absolutely love the story of the Kursk submarine and its trapped crew, a horrifying, hopeless struggle deep under the sea. You can also dive into the chilling tale of Ted Bundy, with details you've probably never heard before. Both are incredible stories worth your time.